Well, it's halfway through spooky season. Or is it? Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thanks for spending some time with me today. This is my mid-month check-in for the month of October 2024. And so today I thought I would go over what I've read the first 2 weeks of the month, talk about what I'm reading now, what is on my kind of nebulous TBR for the rest of the month. And then I thought I'd talk about what you can expect to see on the channel over the next 2 weeks, as well as, there's been I've seen a lot of discourse recently about whether or not BookTube is toxic. And there are a couple different avenues of this. The newest one being, does BookTube have a toxic positivity problem? And so I thought maybe I'd spend a little time talking about that at the end. So that is the plan for today. But first, I wanted to let everyone know that last Saturday, the 12th of October, I had the chance to be part of a discussion over on Joanna Reed's YouTube channel, and she has an ongoing series called Why Read. This month, it featured me as well as Philip Chase, who is an author and a professor of medieval studies. And so we had a really wide-ranging conversation about books and reading and style and what it is we hope to get out of our reading life, as well as some experience reading fiction, fantasy, horror, and these kind of things. And it was a really wonderful discussion. And I will leave a link in the description of this video, so I encourage you all to check that out if that sounds interesting to you. And definitely check out her channel as well as Philip Chase's channel. They have a lot of exciting things going on, and I'll link both of them in this video as well. So what did I read so far this month? Well, in the first half of this month, I have finished 9 titles, which isn't exactly true. The first one I actually finished at the end of September, but it was after I'd already recorded my wrap-up video. So I finished 9 titles. Of those 9 titles, 2 were short story collections, and actually only one of them is not an ARC, an advanced reader copy. So I'm going to go through these quickly because almost all of them are going to have reviews coming up on my channel later. So I won't spend too much time on them now. But the first book I finished, I was reading when I did my last video, and that was We Shall Be Monsters by Alyssa Wees. And this is like a dark fairy tale that I thought was really, really wonderful. It has to do with a young girl who lives at the edge of a forest, which is an enchanted forest, and things happen, and she has to go into the forest to kind of rescue her mother. It is really, really wonderful exploration of family and of the relationship between mother and daughter as well as grandmother, and how you inherit the experiences of your parents, and then what it means to live in this world that is neither magic nor non-magic, this boundary between the enchanted forest and the not. I thought it was a really, really wonderful story. It's definitely a fairy tale, and I had a great time with it. So that's the first thing I finished. I actually finished that at the end of September. And then next, I finished a book called Schroeder by Neil Cassidy, and this is a relatively short novel that's all told as a stream of consciousness, and you follow the main character wakes up one morning and he gets on his bike and he goes through his town on a killing spree, and you are with him the whole time. And then you have to piece together through as the story goes why he is going about this and what is going on in his life that has caused him to go on this journey, as you will. So it's a dark story. It's definitely interesting. It's, like I said, dark. I did enjoy it. I didn't think it was great, but I thought it was good. I thought it used the stream of consciousness style pretty effectively. So that was the second book I finished. The next one is a novel called Deadly Animals by Marie Turney. And this one I did not love so much. I think, though, I might be in the minority. I look at the reviews on Goodreads and so forth, and it seems everyone else is really, really enjoying this, and it won an award for like debut mystery or something like this. This is a story of a young girl. It's set in the 80s, I believe, and the main character is a 14-year-old girl, and she is kind of a loner, an outsider. She's just a little bit different. To some extent, she is kind of slightly coded as being neurodivergent, though that's not explicit, and she finds the dead body of a child who'd gone missing. And she ends up going about this investigation on her own because she doesn't feel the police are doing a good enough job. I thought the main character was interesting. I thought the character development was good. But overall, I just thought the story, it didn't work for me. I thought it was very clear who the kind of killer was right from the beginning. And I thought it was so clear that it had to be a red herring. And then they just kept piling on. And so it didn't feel interesting. There was no cat and mouse. There was no like really exciting reveal. Yeah, for me, it just didn't work. But apparently I'm in the minority, like I said. So it is it has an interesting main character who's this, like I said, she's a young girl, but the way she finds this body, for instance, is that she collects roadkill and she like hides it around her area where she lives, and she goes and checks on it to see like how things decay at like a scientific observation, and she takes notes and makes drawings of it. So she's really independent in this way. So she has this kind of dark and macabre personality where she just wants to learn more and more and more. So she's very smart, she's very precocious, and like I said, the main character is developed in an interesting way. Just overall, yeah, for some reason the story did not hit for me. I do have a I do have a more fleshed out review over on Goodreads, so I'll link to that in the description of this video. But I don't think I'm going to do a video review for this just because it didn't do enough for me. The next book I read is one of the short story collections. This one is called Zakajimo, Indigenous Horror Fiction, edited by Nathan Adler and Kateri Akiwenzi Dam. And this is another collection of Indigenous horror. This is the second one I've read this year. The first one was called Never Whistle at Night, and that was a collection of Indigenous dark fiction, not just horror. This one is just horror, but it does have a really interesting idea of what it means to be horror. And it has this anti-colonial and anti-imperialist lens that I think is really wonderful. It's very short. It's only 11 stories, I think. But I really enjoyed it. All of the authors in this collection are actually from Indigenous communities that are based in what is now called Canada. Never Whistle at Night, all of those authors, I believe, are from communities that are in what is now called the US. So, slightly different region of authors, but a lot of the same kind of ideas and themes. And this was a really good collection. Even though it was so short, it has a wide variety of genres and of subgenres. It was actually quite a lot of fun. And so that review will be coming up soon. Next, I finished a fantasy novel called The Wheel of the Infinite by Martha Wells, and this was actually published 20 years ago, and this is the revised and updated edition. I had a good time with this. It was relatively slow paced, and it used that time to build up the world and to build up the characters, which I thought were really well developed. I haven't read any of Martha Wells' other fantasy. I've read her sci-fi before, so I was excited to read this, and the pacing could have been, picked up maybe one or two notches, and I would have appreciated that. But overall, I thought it was a good story. Next is another collection of short stories. This is Extinction Hymns by Eric Raglan. And this I thought was really good. Eric Raglan, I have read other short stories that he's written, and I have read some collections he's edited. And because of that, I had certain expectations going into this collection, and I was very wrong. So this I thought was a really subtle, dark, ominous collection of unapologetically queer horror that I really, really loved. I thought this was phenomenal. So Extinction Hymns by Eric Raglan. Then I read Sundown in San Ojuela by M.M. Olivas. And this, again, took me by surprise. I don't know if this is a debut novel or not, but it is really wonderful. It is a story exploring a young woman who has to return to where she grew up after her aunt dies, and she has to face the ghosts that are from that town, both literal and figurative. Her family are all Latino, but it has this interesting exploration of, they come from indigenous Mesoamerican communities, so Aztec communities. They track their lineage back to the conquistadors and the Spanish who conquered what is now Mexico. And so they have this dual lineage of indigenous Mexicans as well as Spanish, and how that dual identity manifests in their experiences. And then you have other characters who have white parents and Latino parents, and so they come also from this mixed race background. And all of these kind of ideas of colonization, both physical colonization of land, but also colonization of identity and of purpose and of what it means to be, are all explored in a really subtle way. I thought it was actually a really wonderful story. It took me by surprise. So I enjoyed that quite a lot. Next, I continued my journey in the realm of the Elderling series by Robin Hobb. And so this is a series of 16 books that are set into different chunks. And so the first chunk is a trilogy called the Farseer trilogy. I read the first book in this last month, and the second book is called Royal Assassin. I finished that this month, and I thought it was wonderful. I think the way she built out her world, it is very slow-paced fantasy, yet not a moment is wasted, and nothing is lethargic. And all of the time is built this really emotional exploration of character and of situation. And this was really, really wonderful. There's one more book in this first trilogy, and when I read that, I'll probably do a review of that whole first trilogy because I'm having a really great time with this. So that one was Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. And then the last title I completed in these last 2 weeks is called The Last Hour Between Worlds by Melissa Crusoe. And this is a contemporary fantasy that follows a woman who is at a New Year's Eve party essentially, and reality starts to shift. And she is an investigator who part of her work is dealing with these like ever shifting realities. And so she has to figure out what is going on. So it has these elements of a locked room mystery added to this fantastical world where it is similar to our own, but not quite, where you can fall into other levels of reality that are below the quote unquote prime level. And every level down you get gets farther and farther away from what you expect to be a normal reality and harder to get out of. So it combines these high stakes and locked room mystery and New Year's Eve party. I think the author was inspired by a combination of Edgar Allan Poe meets Groundhog Day a little bit. And so anyway, I actually had a good time with this. I didn't think it was great. It took me a while to get into it, but then once I get into it, I found it very compelling and readable. Once I got past maybe the halfway point, then I didn't want to put it down. Up until then, I was a little bit iffy on it. But anyway, there'll be a review coming up for that next month as well. And so that's what I finished so far, 9 titles in the first 2 weeks of October. Now, what am I reading now? I'm only reading one book right now. I am still continuing with the Best Horror of the Year, Volume 15, edited by Ellen Datlow, and I'm having a great time with this. It's a big chunker of a book, but so far there have been so many great stories in it, and so I'll continue reading this. I'm about 3/4 of the way done, so that's the only thing I'm reading right now, but I'm having a really good time with it, and we'll see what I pick up when I'm done with that. And thinking of what my TBR is going to be for the rest of the month, I still have 3 arcs that I want to read before the end of the month that are being published in November. So I want to get them read. Aside from that, I don't really have any plans right now. At the monastery where I live, it's a very busy season coming up. We have exams coming in the middle of November, and they're the very stressful type of exams. And so this next couple weeks are all going to be dedicated to preparing for that. And so I don't really have the free time to read that I would like to. So I don't have any big plans. I would like to get through these arcs that I have lined up because I want to stay on top of them before they get published. And I think outside of those, what I'll probably do is I have a number of short story collections that I want to read. I even mentioned 2 in my last video that I'd hoped to read and I didn't touch. One by Laird Barron and one another anthology edited by Ellen Datlow about psychological horror. And so maybe I'll pick up some of those because it's nice to read short stories when I'm really busy. I can take 10, 15 minutes and complete a whole story and not feel as overwhelmed. But I don't have many big plans other than that. So we'll see. It's really going to depend on how my exam preparation goes because it's a very stressful time in this series of exams that are coming up. Part of what I've been thinking about as I've been thinking of what I'm going to read next and next and next is that it is spooky season and everyone has all these recommendations for spooky season, right? When we get to the season where everyone's thinking about Halloween. Yeah, I read so much horror. I kind of am always in spooky season. And so this idea of it being spooky season or not spooky season is a little bit discordant with my actual reading life. But the interesting thing is so far I've read very little horror, at least relatively speaking, just due to the arcs I had lined up for this month. And I would like to read some spookier books, some books that line up with the season, even though, the season is kind of incidental. I will say, I grew up in New England and I went to undergraduate and graduate school all in New England. And so more than Halloween coming up, I really have an affection for autumn in general. And so growing up where I did, you have 4 very distinct seasons. Where I live now in India, the seasons are hot and then really hot and then really hot but kind of windy and then really, really rainy insofar as the rain doesn't stop for a few months at all, but it somehow is still hot. And so those are the seasons I get here. So it's a lot different. So I do miss autumn a little bit. And so I do kind of gravitate towards books that give me autumn vibes, which aren't always spooky vibes, but they usually overlap quite a bit. And I haven't read a lot of those so far this year, just because I've been busy and I've had these arcs. And so I'm hoping to pick up at least a few books that give me autumn vibes over the course of the next couple weeks to kind of lock me into my version of spooky season, which is more about the season than it is about the spooky, because the spooky I get all year long. And part of the reason that my reading has been so erratic and hasn't been lined up is because I have this kind of arc overload, which is really a first world problem, no doubt. But someone like me who does request a lot of arcs, since I'm not well known, I don't have a website, I don't have a big following, then I'm never guaranteed that I'm going to get an arc that I request. So most of my arcs I get through NetGalley. And so you make a request, and often you won't know if you actually receive that arc, sometimes for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sometimes you get a notification a month later that you've been approved or you've been rejected. And so it just so happened the next couple weeks, I was approved for way more books than I had anticipated being approved for. And so as a result, I have all these arcs that I feel obligated to read before the publication date so I can get some sort of review out for them. And it's a little bit overwhelming, I'm not going to lie, because my reading schedule is now dictated by these obligations. And usually I'm much more of a mood reader. I have a huge, never-ending TBR, and I don't mind that. I don't mind a TBR list that is just always expanding, because then no matter what I'm in the mood for, whatever strikes my fancy, I'll have something that is somewhere in that TBR that I can pick up and I can run with. And so I don't mind having this overwhelmingly large, ever-growing TBR, but it is being kind of dominated by my arcs right now. And it has nothing to do with BookTube in general. It just has to do with being approved for far more arcs than I had anticipated being approved for. So that is a little bit of like a bummer. It is kind of shaping how I read a little bit, and is not my favorite way to read, because I feel kind of like I'm penned in, like I don't have as many choices as I would like. But at the same time, trying to look on the bright side of it, it is slowing down some other aspects of my reading in a way that I think are useful. So for instance, as I mentioned, I'm reading right now the Farseer trilogy, and eventually I hope to read the whole realm of the Elderlings, just 16 novels. And normally, my habit is, if I get into a series that I really like, once I finish one, I just pick up the next, and I don't stop, and I go back to back to back to back to back. And I can't do that right now. So I'm kind of pacing myself out. It looks maybe one a month. Maybe I'll do some months, I'll do two, we'll see. But right now I have to pace it out, because especially these books are chunky, 500-600 pages. So if I have all these obligations to read arcs, I can't fit in the my normal habit of reading back to back to back in this series. And that's good for me. It's disrupting my normal way of reading. And what also is good is, even though I do have, like, I'm an emotional reader and a mood reader, I don't have as many choices. Now, obviously, when I request arcs, I request books that I find interesting that line up with the genres and the styles that I like to read. But the order I read them in is about their release dates. It's not about what is interesting me at the time. And so what I'm trying to do is, even though this does feel like it's kind of penning me in and dictating what I read and what I don't read, I'm trying to experience it in a positive way and say, I still enjoy the books, I still enjoy reading. And so what is my experience of reading when some of my choice is taken away? And especially, my choice isn't really taken away, right? Like, I made these decisions, and no one is going to, I'm not going to go to jail if I don't, review these books in a timely fashion. So it's really still my own personal sense of obligation and my own pressure that I'm putting on myself. But aside from that, when I have less choice in the matter, and so what I'm reading is a slightly more dictated to me, how can I still engage with that and not be at the whimsy of my normal kind of mood reading or emotional reading decision-making process? And so it's an interesting experience right now. It does feel a little overwhelming. I think that, combined with my preparation for my exams coming up, are a little overwhelming. But I'm trying to look at it as a positive experiment, and so we'll see how it goes. It is also making me a little more cautious, though, about just requesting arcs willy-nilly, and I'm trying to be more strategic and only request a few at a time, and then once I get rejected, then request more, and not just request all the ones that seem interesting all at the same time, because too many approvals, this is what happens, right? I get myself into these messes. So that, just some ideas on spooky season and a little bit of arc overload, but that goes into my TBR. So like I said, I have 3 more arcs that I hope to read this month. I do want to get to Swan Song by Robert McCammon. I don't know if I will. That's kind of the next one in my series of the My Novel Life series. So I'm trying to read a novel from every year since the year I was born, without repeating authors. And so this would be my novel for 1987. I've already read a few, starting 1984, 85, and 86. I really, really want to read this novel, and part of me deciding to read in this My Novel Life challenge is to go through my TBR and find some of the older books in my TBR, especially, that have been lingering for a long time, that always get moved down, down, down as new, exciting, shiny books get added to the top. So I do want to read that. I don't know if it's going to happen this month. There's just too much going on, but it's always kind of there in the background. So that is the TBR. we'll see what happens. If it's just going to be short stories, if I get through the arcs, who knows? I'm not going to stress about it. I have too many other things going on that bring me stress. I don't want my reading life to also bring me stress. So I'm actively working to experience joy no matter what limitations I have in my reading life. So we'll see how it goes. So what do we have coming up on the channel? There are going to be, over the next 2 weeks, there are 4 reviews coming up. The first one is for Sorcery and Small Magics by Mega Ducey. I've talked about this a few times. This is a young man who is in like a wizarding school, essentially, and he is like the class clown, and he and his arch nemesis, who's like, the number one in the class, spell backfires, and the two of them get bound together, and they have to go on a journey together to break this spell. It's kind of a cozy fantasy. I enjoyed it. It was fun. There was some really interesting world building, and it's the beginning of what looks to be a trilogy, so we'll see if I continue with that. Next is going to be a book called Memorials by Richard Chismar. Now, I was first introduced to Richard Chismar's work in his collaboration with Stephen King on the Gwendy's Button Box series, and then from there I read his novels, Chasing the Boogeyman and Becoming the Boogeyman, which I loved. I thought they were really, really great and interesting, playing with form and style. And this is a more straightforward novel. It is like an Americana, road trip, folk horror, all combined. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was a little longer than it had to be, but I had a good time with it. So that will be coming up, a review of that. Next is my review of Absolution. This is the 4th book in the Southern Reach series by Jeff Vandermeer. This I loved. I recently did a review of the original trilogy, and I really enjoyed this 4th book. I thought it added to the trilogy in really exciting ways. So a review of that is coming up. And then the last review is for a novel called Run by Blake Crouch. And this is actually Blake Crouch's first novel that he independently published, and now they're republishing, I think, since he has gotten so much more popular since then. So his publishing house is republishing this, and this was great. It was really propulsive, really dynamic, keeps you on the edge of your seats the whole time. It's a thriller, a psychological thriller in many ways. And so those are the 4 reviews that I have coming up over the next 2 weeks. And next Monday, I have a video that is an original book tag that I created called My Life in Genre, and I created a number of questions that line up with different literary genres as a way to just get a little deeper understanding of who I am as a reader and as a person. And so hopefully many people will pick up this book tag. I thought it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun coming up with questions for it, and then answering the questions. And so that's going to go up next Monday. And so hopefully other people are interested in that as well. And that is what is coming up on the channel in the next 2 weeks. Lastly, I don't want to ramble too long. This video has already gone long enough. But, I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of BookTube and toxicity. And is BookTube toxic? And there are 3 ways that I've seen this discussed, and I'm kind of combining them all into one. And the first one is, the dangers of BookTube and the dangers of BookTube as a creator. And there have been a number of videos on this, both sides. And I haven't really been on BookTube long enough to have a strong opinion on it, except that I think one of the dangers that's very clear is how easy it is for your reading life to become mere content. And it's very easy to look at your metrics and to look at your numbers and say, well, what can I do to increase those? And luckily, I haven't had that problem, but I can see how that's a draw. And right now, the way I record videos and I write reviews, they do take quite a lot of time, and they do bite into my reading life. But I'm getting better at them. They require less editing, hopefully, as I go. I'm getting a little more natural at them. That's one level of toxicity, is that putting yourself on BookTube steals the joy from your reading life. I think it's a very real danger. I can see how that can happen. You're always chasing trends. You're always trying to analyze the algorithm, whatever that means, how you can fall into these traps. And then what's the point if you're really reading for content? I think we have this habit, at least in America, where hustle culture is so predominant that anything we're doing as a hobby has to be leveled up to be more than just a hobby. And it can't just be something we enjoy. It becomes something that we need to either monetize or profit off of in some way. And that just seems to be what is expected of us, right? Never mind like the literal reasons that the economy is very difficult for many people. Like, never mind that, but just there's this cultural idea that we can't have anything that is just a hobby. And so for me, really looking at BookTube as an extension of my hobby of reading is what keeps me from falling into this trap of it being toxic. But I can see how it can be, being on this side of the camera. So that's the first thing. That's the simple one. I don't have too many deep thoughts on it. The second one that people talk about is that BookTube creates, and I say BookTube because I don't use Instagram or TikTok, but these apply for, I guess, Book Talk and Bookstagram as well. That these create unrealistic expectations in viewers' minds of what their reading life should be like. Many people that are part of BookTube read a lot more than your average reader, and so they create a sense of what is expected of you as a reader. They also create a sense of like FOMO, fear of missing out, and there is this like promotion of buying more and more books, and so supporting this kind of unchecked capitalism. And I definitely see that. I see a lot of videos even recently going about how precious books are. There's so many videos about showing off how beautiful your books are and what books have the most beautiful covers, and with the Folio Society collection that costs like exorbitant amounts of money. And I appreciate beautiful books, and I appreciate well-designed books. They are attractive to me, but that isn't why I read. And so for me, the idea of buying books, especially books I already have, just because they have a nicer cover or they're more beautiful or more well laid out, it just does not vibe with my personal kind of ethos of not wanting to have a lot of possessions in general, and not wanting to strive for things just because they're shiny and new and exciting, even though I can appreciate the effort and the art that went into that. I've also seen some discourse about going how you treat the books you own, and a lot of people talking about how they won't ever write in a book, or they go out of their way not to break the spines of books or not to do anything like that. And any books that I do have physical copies of, I want them to be in like readable shape, and I don't go out of my way to break the spine or anything. But also, like, the point of me owning books is to read them. And so I do write in my books, fiction and nonfiction alike. Not a lot, especially in fiction, but if I'm reading and I see a line or an idea or something that jumps out at me, then I might underline it, or I might even highlight it. Just because, what else am I going to do with this book for? Like, that's what it's for. It's not precious. The book is there. The physical book is there for me to engage in story. And anything that helps me engage in story, I think, is useful. Now, I don't dog ear my pages. That's just because if I did that, the book won't sit straight and pages rip. And so I don't really feel I need to do that. But I do write in the books. I do my best not to break the spine, but I also am not that worried if they do get broken. There's a whole group of people that will rip off their covers and make new covers for it. I have no skin in that game. I've never been compelled to do that. I also don't have the skills to do bookbinding or to create new covers, so it's never been like a thing for me. But I'm not precious about my books. My books, the physical books, are serving a purpose, and that purpose is to enable me to engage in story. And if they're beautiful and if they're attractive, then I appreciate that, but that is not their main priority for me. So this idea of being really precious about it, it it doesn't interest me, you know. But I can see how BookTube can encourage people to want to buy more and more and more. It can make you feel like you're missing out. It can make you feel like you need to not only read more, but you have to own the nicest, newest books, the new collector's editions. And I think that is lamentable, but also understandable. And so, from my side, this is not a part of BookTube culture that I really engage in. It doesn't interest me. But I can see how it can be toxic to viewers in that way. But at the same time, our lives are overwhelmed by ads trying to make us buy things, both explicit and implicit. And so it isn't that unusual that everything we do, anything we try to pick up as a hobby or as an enjoyment, people are trying to make money off of it, whether it is the creators or anyone peripheral to it. So in my experience, this isn't unique to BookTube. This is just like the BookTube flavor of what happens when you live in a consumerist culture. And, it's just something you have to be on guard for. And if you're sensitive to it, then you have to put up your own kind of guardrails to navigate what it means to live in a culture that's trying to constantly make you feel like less than because you don't have the newest, shiniest thing. And if you constantly believe and you fall into the trap of believing that you're going to find self-fulfillment and happiness by having the newest, shiniest thing, by, seeking happiness outside of yourself in some way, then you're going to be perpetually disappointed. And, BookTube is no different than anything else in that regard. So I find pleasure in books. They serve a purpose for me. I'm not overly invested in accumulating physical books for any purpose other than as a way to engage in story. I do prefer to read physical books over digital books just because I prefer the experience. But most of my books that I own are digital just because they are more cost effective and because a lot of them I can get out of the library. So I don't have access to physical libraries where I am, but I do have access to digital libraries. Um, so most of the books I read are digital. I do prefer physical, but not because I care about having the book, but because the experience of reading a physical book is more pleasurable to me. So I can appreciate that level of toxicity to BookTube. But I think it's toxicity that we all get just living in a consumerist culture. And we always have to be on guard to some extent to try to protect ourselves. And BookTube, encouraging people of buying books they don't need is just, a new flavor, but it's not something new in general. The last type of toxicity, though, that I've been seeing, and this is the newer one that got me thinking about this, is that BookTube has a potential problem of toxic positivity. And the thought process behind this is that booktubers are have an interest in getting free books from publishers and from authors and getting other kind of perks that you can get along with being a booktuber, which are very few and far between, but people have are motivated to do this. And so as a result of this, they just give good reviews to everything they read. And this idea that they are not critically engaging in literature or books in any meaningful way, but they're just doing it because they just want the popularity that comes with getting free books, getting accolades, having, being an insider in that regard. And so that is this idea of toxic positivity where the books are overhyped, not because content creators care about those books or are moved by them, but because they are moved by what it means to be a popular booktuber and all of the accoutrement that may come with that. And, that's definitely a possibility. I haven't experienced that in my life, but there are definitely booktubers who I've seen videos that very clearly the videos are made because they believe they are going to attract the algorithm, or at least they come off that way. From my side, my channel, as you know, is mostly devoted to book reviews. And I just made the decision that, especially with arcs that I'm reading, I don't really feel a strong need to do a video review of an arc that I didn't like. A book that I didn't like, I'll do a written review for it because I agreed to as part of getting that book for free. Considering the amount of time and energy that goes into thinking up a review, filming it, editing it, and all this work, I'd rather do reviews for books that I actually want to promote. So if I do a review for a book that I didn't like, those are going to probably be few and far between, and they probably won't be arcs. They'll probably be books that are either books that have been around for quite a long time, or for some reason there is something compelling about it that I feel a need to have to speak about it. But in general, I just don't feel a need to make negative reviews. If there's a book I didn't like, I would just not review it, as opposed to making a fake review. I'm not going to lie about a book. I'm not going to lie about my experiences with a book and say that I enjoyed a book that I didn't, but I'm just not compelled to make a video for a book that I didn't enjoy. So that is how I balance that. I don't think that's a toxic positivity. I just don't personally in my life find that there is benefit to expend that amount of energy in, taking down a book. I'm not like a paid book critic. If I was a book critic that worked for a publication, then you have to be honest, and whatever is on your desk, you have to review and critique. But I'm not. I get to choose what I put on my channel. And so I'm only going to put books on, for the most part, that I enjoyed reading that I want to share with people. And I don't think that is toxic positivity. I think that is just recognizing that for my own emotional well-being, I don't want to spend time, crapping on things because I don't find any benefit in it. I'd rather uplift things than push things down. And so that's my take on that. As far as other booktubers and content creators, inflating their ratings and their experiences of books because they want to be popular and they want to get the perks from publishers and authors and be like critical darlings. I don't really know who's getting hurt by that. I think if anything, you're doing yourself a disservice to create content like that. Never mind like your own moral standards, but just like what is the real benefit? What are you chasing? And is it going to make you, emotionally fulfilled to get free books in exchange for artificially inflating your experience of a book? That's not for me to decide, though. That's for every individual person to decide. So I just go about doing what I think feels right for me. And in that, it is only promoting books for the most part that I have enjoyed or that I think people will enjoy, even if I didn't love them, that I think other people will find enjoyable. And so that's how I go about it. So there are numerous ways BookTube can be toxic, right? It can be toxic to the creators because your experience of reading becomes a job and it becomes about searching for content, not for experiencing the joy of engaging in narrative or story. It can be toxic for consumers because you have this idea that you have these unrealistic expectations of what it might be, how many books you should be reading, how much you should be spending on books, what is important to add to your collection or not. And it can be toxic for everyone if people are just inventing stories as a way to gain popularity, but they're not engaging in this, whatever this is, BookTube, in a critical or honest way. But you know what? I think those are interesting things to talk about. I don't think any of them are unique to BookTube. I don't think any of them are uncommon. I think they're all just extrapolations of the current place we are in contemporary society and culture, which is dominated by consumerism and by capitalism and by, you know what? I take that back. I don't even think it has to do with where we are in culture now. I think we always are searching for happiness outside of ourselves. And we're always trying to grab onto things that are external to our own minds and believing those things are going to make us fulfilled. And that will bring us closer to this elusive happiness, this long-term, never-ending happiness. And that has always been like that. That's not just contemporary culture. This is just the current manifestation of it. And so as long as we do that, we're going to be dissatisfied. And we can harm others in the process, I suppose. And so for me, I don't think any of these things are unique to BookTube. I think they're just reflections of what it means to be living in an imperfect world and doing the best we can in an imperfect world and trying to find happiness for ourselves and others. And so that's what I choose to focus on. And so identifying these kind of pitfalls, both for myself as a content creator, quote unquote, but also as a consumer of BookTube and of books in general, being aware of the pitfalls and doing my best to navigate them in a healthy way that keeps me content and that realizes that my own sense of self-worth and value and fulfillment and happiness is never going to come from BookTube, but it's never going to come from books even. It's going to come from my experience of engaging with books and with art and my experience of how I want to be in the world around me. That's where my sense of fulfillment is going to come from. And so as long as I focus on that, then I think you can avoid, or I can avoid, some of the more potentially toxic elements of BookTube. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. I think it is an interesting thing to talk about because the only way we can really avoid those pitfalls is by engaging in community and talking about it together and helping each other avoid these things and to be part of a community that cares for each other and is trying to help one another be content and happy and find enjoyment in reading because that's the whole point, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of these things down in the comments. Anything you're thinking, please share it down below. For now, though, I've rambled long enough. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.